Hi friends, Pastor Steve here with the honor of introducing our speaker for today. We're in the middle of a series called Certain Truths for Uncertain Times. And bringing God's certain truth to us today is BlackRock's Pastor Emeritus of Global Missions, Larry Fullerton. Until he retired 18 months ago, Pastor Larry served here for 23 years as BlackRock's executive pastor and pastor of global missions. He's only been retired for a mere months, and already we're pulling him back into service, not only to preach today, but we're also in the process of installing Larry in a part-time care role, helping us with the officiating of BlackRock weddings and funerals, which we call life celebrations. Performing these ceremonies was one of Pastor Dan's duties, which he has had to leave behind. And so we're really thankful that Larry has agreed to step in to help us through this important role. Today, Pastor Larry is sharing with us about the art of friendship, which is certainly appropriate because he remains a consummate friend to many, many of us. So BlackRock, please welcome back my good friend and yours, Pastor Larry Fullerton.
Pastor Emeritus for Global Missions. I'm very grateful that the elders bestowed that title upon me, and I must admit, after they did so, I thought to myself, what does the word emeritus mean? It's a Latin word, but I don't speak Latin or read Latin, and so I went to the pastoral staff, figuring they would know. Josh is a graduate from Yale. He ought to know what it means. He had no idea, so I decided, well, I'll go to the senior pastor. He has a PhD. He'll know what it means. So I went to Steve and, hey, Steve, what does emeritus mean? He looked at me with a wry smile. He said, well, emeritus pastor, in a kind of a loose translation, means pastor without pay. You may be wondering this morning, where is Pastor Steve? How come he's not here? Well, he's away with his wife celebrating their anniversary. And so I am the substitute pastor. I must admit, after being at the church for over 23 years and being at the pulpit many, many times, I'm a little bit nervous this morning. I haven't done this for a while. Reminds me of the pastor who was in a small church, and he was also nervous. And so he was looked around over the congregation, and he was trying to think of an analogy he could use to illustrate what a substitute teacher was, or a substitute preacher. And so he noticed there was a broken window in the back of the church, and he said, well, that's like, you know, when you put a window's broken and you put a piece of plastic over it, and it's kind of an opaque piece of plastic, and you get light through it and you can see dimly things, but things aren't as clear and as robust as it would be if the glass was there. The pane of glass is gone. So he preached his sermon, and at the end of it, he felt pretty good about that. It went pretty well, and he was in the back greeting people, and an elderly woman you could tell that she really wanted to speak to the pastor. So eventually she came to him and grabbed him by the arm and said, oh, pastor, you were not a broken piece of glass this morning. You were a real pain. Well, I hope it won't be too painful for you this morning or for me as I preach. 18 months being away from you, and I've missed you. And I'm grateful for the privilege of being back here. And we have to say, over the last 18 months, there has been a feeling of anxiety, a sense that things are broken, things aren't exactly right. The virus has kind of upset our lives, and there are a variety of ways in which we feel unsettled. Maybe you feel especially unsettled this morning. October 21, 2020, a survey was conducted by the American Psychiatric Association, asking people about their feelings of anxiety during the last year. The number one issue they found was that people were anxious about their families. 80% of the people that they surveyed said they were very concerned about the well-being of their families. Second on the list was the health in the coronavirus. Third was gun violence, and finally was the upcoming election. Those findings are remarkable The American Psychiatric Association said because in the past 3 years, each of those categories have been between 32 to 37%. Anxiety in America has almost doubled in the past year. And many would say that that's the result of that is what we see with the rise of domestic violence and with the situation with alcoholism. You and I live in uncertain times. Most of us have to admit that we sometimes wonder what is going on in the world. And sometimes the result is that we want to withdraw into our families, or we want to find what Pastor Steve called our happy place last week, the place of safety. We want to withdraw into a cocoon. But Jesus says in John, the 17th chapter, the 33rd verse, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. We as Christians are called not into an inner place of safety. Rather, we are called to be involved in the lives of people around us, especially during times of when things are uncertain. So today I want to talk about friendship. How does friendship help us cope with the anxieties of life? Let's see what Paul says concerning friendship in Philippians chapter 2. Paul writes these words, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being right-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should not only look after his own interest, but also the interest of others. So how do we this morning look out on the interest of others rather than just being self-centered? How do we do that? How do we have friendships that last and make a difference? Friendships are those things that walk with us not only in the light, but that friend that walks with us also in the darkness. And it's better to walk in the darkness with a friend than in the light all by yourself. Henry Nouwen, a Dutch Catholic theologian, wrote this: when we honestly ask ourselves which person in our lives means the most to us, we often find it as those who, instead of giving advice, solution, or cures, have chosen rather to share our pain and touch our wounds with warm and tender hands. I have a friend named Dr. Jerry Root. We worked together on a staff at the church I served at prior to me coming to Black Rock. Jerry went on from that position in the church to get a PhD and taught at Wheaton College in Illinois. Whenever you asked Jerry about friendship, he would often say that the true friend is that person that you can call at 2 a.m. in the morning. That person you can call when you're coming home from, say, New York City, in the back roads in Connecticut, and you have 2 flat tires, and it's raining or it's snowing, and the weather is terrible, and your family's out of town. Who is that person that you can call at 2 a.m. in the morning? Say, hey, I need a favor. I need you to come and pick me up and take me home. Who is that 2 a.m. person? I mentioned that Jerry was on the pastoral staff of the church I served at prior to coming to Black Rock. One of the things I learned about Jerry was that he was always late for meetings. I was the executive pastor at that church also, and Jerry reported to me, and no matter what I did, no matter how I tried to cajole him, no matter how I tried to reason with him, no matter how I tried to threaten him, he was always late to every meeting. Matter of fact, the staff had a term for Jerry. They called it Jerry time. Jerry time was 20 or 30 minutes after the meeting was supposed to start. He would show up, and it used to drive me nuts. Until I come to realize that Jerry was that 2 a.m. person. He was that person that people could call in their extremity, and Jerry would always respond. I had him speak here at Black Rock at the men's retreat 5 or 6 years ago, and I was so elated when he walked out of the terminal, because I was certain that he will have found somebody and shared with them on the airplane. He'd be late even for that. But Jerry was voted as the most popular professor at Wheaton College several times because of this characteristic. He was a 2 a.m. friend. So let me start with a request for you this morning, an assignment. And that is on your way home today, maybe in the car, or maybe around coffee at some point today, or tomorrow, you tell another friend, who is that friend who you would call at 2 a.m. in the morning? If you really were in distress, who is that friend? Identify at least one person that's on that list. Paul in Philippians 2 mentions two of his friends. He writes this, I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, that I may be cheered when I receive news about you. I have no one else like him who takes a genuine interest in your welfare. For everyone looks out for his own interest, not those of Jesus Christ. But you know that Timothy has proven himself, because as a son with his father, he has served me in the work of the gospel. Timothy is an example in Paul's life of that 2 a.m. friend, someone who would stand by him not only in the light of a wonderful moment, but also in the darkness of persecution and heartache. Paul says in this very chapter, the verse 17, that he's about to be poured out like a drink offering. He's in prison as he writes this letter to the church at Philippi, as he commends Timothy as a friend. Romans, the 16th chapter, the final chapter in Paul's letter to the Romans, Paul writes that Timothy was with him at the end. A few weeks ago, Ronnie Bales, my son-in-law, was diagnosed with the coronavirus. He is a nurse practitioner, works in New York. He had his shots, but somehow he got the virus, and it was a severe case, and he spent several days in the ICU unit at Bridgeport Hospital. And then to compound the situation, his wife, my daughter, Amy, also came down with the virus, as did their 18-month-old daughter, Eliza. So now all three of them had the virus in one home, and to make the situation even worse, Amy, again, my daughter, was pregnant. My wife, being a pediatrician, was very concerned about the baby and Amy's life, of course. And so she tried to get her the monoclonal vaccine, but it didn't work out. She just couldn't get through to the authorities. And so she, in desperation, called one of her friends, Chioma Nwangu, a member here at the church, who is also a doctor. Chioma is not Amy's doctor, not Susan's doctor, not my doctor. She's just a friend. And Chioma spent hours and hours on the phone in the midst of her busy practice, taking time, extra time, to call the insurance company and the doctors and the hospital. And eventually, Amy got the shot, and she's fine now. But you see, Chioma was Susan's 2 a.m. friend, someone she could call in the midst of a tragedy or a potential tragedy in her life. Who is your 2 a.m. friend? Timothy was Paul's 2 a.m. friend. But Philippians goes on and gives us a second friend of Paul's, verse 25. But I think it's necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus, my brother and fellow worker and fellow soldier, who is your messenger, who you sent to take care of my needs. For he longed for all of you and is distressed because you heard he was ill. Indeed, he was ill and almost died, but God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but also on me, to spare me sorrow upon sorrow. Sometimes we look at the Apostle Paul as this individual with a strong character who thunders forth dictums to the church and to Christ followers. But here Paul reveals a very human side of his life. He said the death of Epaphroditus would result in sorrow upon sorrow. You know, we know a lot about Timothy. We know a lot about Paul. We know hardly anything about Epaphroditus. Kent Hughes wrote a commentary on Philippians, and this is what he wrote concerning Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus was a layman whom we never would have heard of were it not for Paul's brief reference to him here. Epaphroditus served in no public capacity. He did not shepherd a flock as did Timothy. He did not take the gospel to any unreached areas. He did not receive any special revelation. He wrote nothing. All he did was faithfully discharge his duties by delivering a bag of money to Paul and then by looking after him. And he was called by Paul brother, fellow worker, fellow soldier, identified to the Philippians as apostle and minister. Epaphroditus is not a name that's familiar to us, but he's a friend that exemplified to Paul as that person who looked not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others, to the interest of Paul. He was Paul's friend in the shadow as well as in the light. Notice the characteristics of these three people, Paul, Timothy, and Epaphroditus. Paul, we know a great deal about. He wrote 13 books in the Bible. He's someone who was venerated 2,000 years after his death. Timothy we know a lot about because Paul wrote 3 letters to him. We know that Timothy's mother was a Jew, and therefore in the societal structure of the day, Timothy would not be considered to be a Jew. But Paul had him circumcised so that in their outreach to the Jewish community, Timothy would have entered into the lives of the Jewish people. But Epaphroditus, we hardly know anything about him, other than that he was a Gentile, a non-professional, a layman in the church. And so with our friends, there needs to be no ethical bound to our friendship. No cultural or economic or racial barrier that would cause us not to have friends outside our culture. And may that be the soul of this church, that we are multiracial, multicultural, multi-economic in the income that we have in our homes. And so in these 3 friends, we see that characteristic. Now, I started the sermon by asking you a favor, giving you an assignment, and that assignment was, who is the person that you would call at 2 a.m. in the morning if you had a dire need? But there was a second question I want to ask you to answer, maybe with a friend today. And that is, which of your friends would be willing to call you at 2 a.m. in the midst of their distress? And what are the things you've done to result in that friendship? Now, I want to speak to the men in the congregation especially, for I think women are much more versed to having 2 a.m. friendships. But men, somehow we carry this structure that we are self-reliant, that we are tough, that we don't need a friend or don't want to be a friend to someone else. For in being a true friend, we find that we are vulnerable, that we are susceptible to actually having to do something. Men, anxiety is rising in our culture. So who in your circle of friends is that friend who would call you at 2 a.m. in the morning? Finally, I've been thinking a lot about friendship this past week. And although we need to be people that we can identify a person that we can call if we have a need and a person that would call us if they have a need, ultimately we have to say, however, that our final friendship needs to be the friendship that we have with Jesus. You know, there's that old song that some of you will recognize as soon as I give the title, What a Friend We Have in Jesus. For some of you, it may be new. The song was penned in 1855. The man who penned it was a man named Joseph Skiven. Came out of a tragic situation that took place in his life. He was about to be married in Ireland. He was a teacher there. Met a woman and they were about to be married. And as the woman was coming actually to the wedding, story goes, she fell off the horse in the midst of a raging river and drowned. Skiven, broken apart by that situation, migrated out of Ireland and went to Canada trying to establish a new life. There he met and fell in love with a woman named Eliza Rice. Tragically, just before their marriage, she also contracted an illness and died. And then upon the death of his mother, he wrote these words, "What a friend we have in Jesus. All our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer." We need to develop friendships with people. But we have to admit that there may be a time when, in our point of desperation, our friend's cell phone is off, or he's out of coverage, or she's just busy. And we cannot reach that person. And so the pivotal person in all our relationships needs to be our friendship with Jesus. What a friend we have in Jesus. All our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Three painful questions. Who is that friend who would call you at 2 a.m. in the midst of his emergency or her emergency? Who is that friend who would call you at 2 a.m.? Who is that friend you would call at 2 a.m. in the midst of your emergency? And finally, is Jesus your friend in the midst of all the troubles and in the midst of the anxieties that we all carry? For he will never be too busy, or you will never have a situation where you will be unable to get through to him. What a friend we have in Jesus.
Thank you for watching Black Rock Church's Sunday service. We're so glad you found us, and we hope this message made you feel more connected to God. In talking about connection, we find that it's super important for people to be connected to others and to community in order to grow in their faith. So if you're in the area, we invite you to join us to worship in a service. You can find out about our times and locations right here on this webpage. We'd also love to help you connect in a group and find people who can walk alongside you as you continue deepening your understanding and faith. And after you get to know us, you might even like to use your gifts to serve on a team. We believe God gave each of us unique gifts that we can use to serve those around us. One body with many different parts. If you're not able to be here in person, don't worry. We have a great online community and many ways for you to join in virtually and talk to us throughout the week. You can also stay in touch on our website, YouTube channel, Facebook, and Instagram. By visiting our website, you can also easily give your offering one time as an online gift or a reoccurring gift. Just click Give at the top. The Bible tells us that tithing is an important part of our relationship with Jesus, and we want to continue to trust God with our lives and our finances. Well, we are so glad you made the choice to get to know us and view one of our services. We hope that you join us next week. Thanks so much for watching.